Welcome to this webinar about small groups. As you listen today, think about what you have been doing in your small groups and what are some changes you could make to help make them more valuable learning experience for your students. And what are you learning about your students? What kind of documentation could you get as you work with them in small group? During this webinar, the following two DEC standards will be addressed. As teachers, we work to meet the needs of our students by continually planning, being flexible, and implementing the best supports for each child to help meet his or her needs along with their families. We also engage in ongoing reflective practices to improve our teaching daily for all students. Hendricks and Weissman in 2006 said, "Quality early childhood curriculum must include small groups in order to enhance learning and to improve the quality and accessibility of instruction." So the very first step is, do you incorporate small groups into your schedules daily? If you don't, that should be the first change you make. We will discuss scheduling a little later in the webinar. As the title of this webinar said, we don't just do small groups to play games. Our small groups need to be intentional. What will the children be learning? What information will I get? We should be individualizing and scaffolding for children all the time. But remember, if you're in a PFA classroom, you need to show how you're individualizing for 25% of your students specifically in your lesson plans and for every child once a month. This may seem tedious, but if you write it down in your lesson plan, it makes you more intentional. Many of us do small groups during choice time. This is okay, but we really do want children to have 60 minutes of uninterrupted play, since this is where so much of their learning, discovery, and problem solving goes on. Our PFA grants have us add 10 minutes to choice time if we're requiring students to come to a small group. If you have an optional small group, then it isn't necessary to increase the time. Often, small groups are done without a real purpose and without careful planning. If you were intentional, then you would know why you did the small group. I will state this several times during our webinar. Continue to ask yourself, why did I just do that activity? What information did I gain? How will I help a child gain a new skill or get closer to mastery? Think about your small groups as I talk about the benefits and strategies. What do you do in your small groups? Were they successful? Was it beneficial to all the children in the group? Is there a child that maybe wasn't as successful as the other children? Now we're going to spend some time discussing the benefits of small group. This information is good to share with parents. When we do small groups, we will see improvements in peer cooperation, which is such an important skill to develop in preschool. We will see growth and development in our students' skills. We will see peers interacting and helping one another. Small groups will make it easier for us to observe our students and document their learning. It's easier to differentiate our instruction when we're working in a small group. Finally, there will be multiple opportunities to use open-ended questions which help our kiddos develop problem-solving and analytical skills. Small groups have been found to encourage more positive interactions among teachers and children. Researchers found that 5 preschoolers to 1 adult resulted in better social and cognitive outcomes. By working with just a few of their peers towards a common goal, our students will further develop their cooperation skills, conversation skills, and discover how to share and be fair. Through small group play, they will learn that they won't always get their way and sometimes have to compromise. Think about an activity you have planned that worked on cooperation. Maybe the next small group you plan, the children will have to share materials to build something or to complete a task. Growth and development. Think about a large group activity with 20 kids. You may only get 1 or maybe 2 times to answer a question. Since preschoolers are still in the process of developing their cognitive and social skills, they often function best when in a small group setting. These settings are a great opportunity for all children involved to further develop their social skills through structural interaction, using language to express their thoughts and needs with peers to accomplish a task. Small groups are especially beneficial for a child with a speech or language problem. I may need more processing time, and I may not feel as much stress when I'm only working with 3 or 4 peers. If I have an articulation problem, maybe you can show me a placement cue to help me with my articulation of a certain sound. Yes, all of this can happen in large group settings, but when in a small group, I have more opportunities to demonstrate knowledge, and you as the teacher have more opportunities to scaffold the individual child. By creating small groups amongst your preschoolers, you'll be able to encourage friendships between children who may not normally play together. This can help create a more inclusive atmosphere within the classroom. We know when we start young, children are more accepting. Continue to switch up the makeup of the groups regularly to help new friendships form and to expose preschoolers to the concept of working with different types of people with different points of view. If groups are formed with different abilities, there are more opportunities for learning experiences, but you must be prepared to scaffold children. Children can help in a natural, non-confrontational way. We should teach children to ask their peers for help. Go to your friend before you ask a teacher. Teacher observation. It's much easier to document and write notes in a group of 3 or 4. Most assessment systems we are using in early childhood have a digital app to help with documentation. You can have a clipboard with blank paper or a checklist with the students' names pre-printed. You can also use Post-it notes. Write each student's name on a Post-it note so you can be sure to get at least one piece of documentation per child. Use mailing labels just like Post-it notes. Maybe you say you will write at least 4 pieces of documentation or collect documentation on a specific objective for each child. Differentiated learning. I stated this before. If you are a state-funded program, your lesson plans must state specifically how you are going to differentiate for your students. Teaching Strategies Gold has made this very easy if you use their intentional teaching cards. Each activity, you can play the same game, just at a different color band depending where the student is developmentally. It's important to preview the card and to know at what level each child in your group is at. If you're not using intentional teaching cards, you'll have increased opportunities to probe a child's knowledge without worrying about 19 other kids. Without this information, you're really just playing a game without a direction. Again, children in small group can be and should be at different levels, but as a teacher, it's critical you know the level the student is at, the objective you're focusing on, and the progression of that objective. Open-ended questions. It's easier to have more in-depth conversations with a small group of kids and really get them to problem solve and think about their answers. Be sure to allow time for children to process your question and to come up with an answer. When we're asking open-ended questions, we know this is what the state monitors are looking for. Don't just bombard children with questions, though. Our goal is to have a conversation with children as they are problem solving. This slide has information from NAEYC's 4th edition of Developmentally Appropriate Practices position statement. We want to be teaching to the whole child at his or her own level. Early childhood educators are responsible for fostering children's development and learning in all of these domains, as well as in general learning competencies and executive functionings, which include attention, working memory, self-regulation, reasoning, problem solving, and approaches to learning. There is considerable overlap and interaction across these domains and competencies. For example, sound nutrition, physical activity, and sufficient sleep all promote children's ability to engage in social interactions that in turn stimulate cognitive growth. Children who experience predictable, responsive relationships and responsive interactions with adults also tend to demonstrate improved general learning competencies and executive functioning. Play develops young children's symbolic and imaginative thinking, peer relationships, language, physical development, and problem solving. And as we know, all of this is going on in our small groups. Small group time allows a teacher to introduce a new concept or material to the children, teach a specific skill to children, encourage conversation and sharing of ideas amongst children, extend their children's thinking, and also focus their observations. Creative Curriculum states the following 5 reasons why we should do our small groups. Remember, keep thinking back to the last small group activity you did. Did you do it for one of these reasons? Did you notice any benefits that I just discussed? How do you form your small groups? It's important to think back to the assessment cycle. Teaching without following assessment data is like driving a bus full of young children blindfolded. You do an activity and you collect data. You then need to take the time to analyze your data and see what it tells you about each student. What changes will you make? What supports could you add or take away? Then you need to take that info and plan the next activity and share with your teammates. This cycle helps determine who should be in your small groups. Creating our small groups is not a guessing game. How could these toys address many objectives or standards? Sometimes you don't need a specific game to play with your students. What if you took a favorite toy and played with it with 2 or 3 kids? What objectives could be addressed playing with magnet tiles? Well, I can count with understanding and recognize how many are in a small set up to 5. With teacher assistance, I could begin to use increasingly complex sentences, express wonder and curiosity about the world by asking questions, solving problems and designing things. If you brought a dollhouse to small group, children could use vocabulary that compares length, height, weight, discuss why people work. If you gave children the opportunity to play with these paint chips on clothespins, they could demonstrate hand-eye coordination to perform the task. They could continue a conversation through 2 or more exchanges. The activity doesn't need to be fancy. You just need to know the purpose. What makes a small group activity successful? These are some guidelines from Creative Curriculum, but it doesn't really matter what curriculum you're using. Keep the activity short. You can learn a lot about the skills of your children in just 10 minutes. If you have materials, take the time to teach the students how to use the materials the way you would like them to during the group. You only have a few children in the group, so there should not be much wait time between turns. When it's my turn, do you know how you will support me so I am successful? Remember that you may be doing a math activity, but the children will be demonstrating social skills, language skills, and maybe even some physical skills. You can rotate so by the end of the week, all children have had the opportunities to be in a small group and to get direct instruction.
And what to put these time I pull out a letter and you have something on your board that begins with that letter, you can put a block on it, okay? Are you ready? All right. Let's do...
Spacebar. Spacebar.
Okay. Does anyone have something that begins with an M? Look at your card. Look at your card. You have something that begins with What do you have? Map. Not map, but I see something else there that begins with Mouse. Mouse. You can put a block on mouse. One of these blocks. Put a block on mouse. Okay, does anyone else have something that begins with You have something that begins with What? Watermelon. Does that begin with No. Okay, let's try a different one. How about P. P. Do you have something that begins with P? Pizza. Excellent. So put a block on pizza. Do you have something that begins with P's, Amir?
I like pizza. Do it.
No, right? You don't have anything that begins with P.
Oh, yeah.
Christian, do you have something that begins with P? What do you have? You have something on here that begins with P? No, these are nails. Nails. What is this? Does pizza begin with P? Yes, it does. So you need to put a block on it. Yes, it does. Okay, let's see if we find another one. What about W? W.
I think I'll go with Heather to make a house. To make a fashion.
Yes, Leah. Watermelon. Watermelon does begin with W. So you can put a block on watermelon. Excellent. S. What about S? What sound does S make? Sock. That's right. So you can put a block on sock. You can put a block on. Excellent. Let's see.
Let's do this again.
Oh, what about this one? Letter A. Now I'm looking for long A. What sound is long?
Here are some ideas to make your small group time more successful. These ideas come from the book Unpacking the Pyramid Model. They're good suggestions for students that are blended into your classrooms, but they're really good suggestions for all young children. We know most of our young children improve when we use visuals. Try using a visual model or an individual activity schedule. We also know individual preferences help with motivation. For example, if I like trains, maybe for my turn you integrate a train into my materials. Small group time is a great time to read a book. Research shows children learn more vocabulary and comprehend stories better when read in a small group. Use a first-then card to teach the child. First you do the activity I'm asking you to do, and then you can do something for a short period that you like. Try having individual materials that are ready and may be adapted for specific children in individual baskets. Using a time timer tells the child how long they have to work at this activity. This particular timer shows the child the passage of time As the red ticks away, there's less and less of the activity left. Provide some children with visual models so they know exactly what they're supposed to do. If you are planned and prepared with all your materials, there won't be wait time for children. Here are a few examples of some open-ended questions you might ask the students as you're working with them. Why did you do that? How did you know to do that? I wonder what will happen if you mix those two colors. What would happen if we didn't do that? This information is from an article titled When Fewer is More, Small Groups in Early Childhood Classrooms. It was written by Barbara Wasick in 2008. She discusses 7 guidelines to follow to form small groups. Small groups should not exceed 5. Groups more than 5 don't allow for enough individualization, and small groups allow for more engagement and comprehension. There's an increased opportunities for interactions with both the teacher and the peers. 2, the goal of the activity should drive how you form the group. If you have a plan for your group, you should have a specific goal. Children can be great models. If you know what you want to accomplish, you will know which children should be placed together. 3, small groups should be intentionally organized. If you're differentiating, children can and should be at different levels, but they can still be in the same groups. Small groups should be at another time besides centers. In small group, you present a concept or engaging in a specific learning experience, while in centers, the focus should be on the children exploring. You're providing less direct instruction and more guidance. Small groups are better than large group to teach content. Research shows children understand stories and vocabulary when reading is done in a small group. Learning opportunities are increased and there is less wait time. There's an increased opportunity for interaction, so make that valuable. Teachers need to play an active role. You need to plan for higher level questioning. The small groups need to be part of your daily schedule. And as I've said this before, they don't need to be long. They can be 10 to 15 minutes. If children are engaged, you could build up to 20 minutes. We all know that with young children, teaching social and emotional skills is critical. It's difficult to learn anything else if you do not have strong social emotional skills. Small groups are perfect for reinforcing these skills. You can work on them while working on other skills or plan a whole group around improving social emotional skills. Small groups have been found to encourage more positive interactions among teachers and children. And in a national study, it was found that 5 preschoolers to 1 adult results in better social and cognitive outcomes for children. There are many activities you can do in a small group to work on social emotional building. You could read a book. You could work on an emotion wheel. You could play the mirror game. You could do an emotional matching game. And on the next slide, I'll show you some of these games. It's not enough just to play the game with the children, but take the time to discuss the emotion and discuss when they have felt that way. Roll the emotion dice and talk about the emotion that landed. When do you feel like that? Can you show me that face? Did we read about someone that felt that way? The Way I Feel is one of many books that does a great job talking about feelings in a way that young children can begin to understand. Read the book and then have a discussion with the children. This is an emotion feeling wheel. You spin the spinner and then you make the face in the mirror. Again, don't just make the face, but discuss when you feel that way. These little mirrors have emotions on one side, and then the child can practice and turn the mirror over and make the face into the mirror. Introducing these mirrors in a small group would be wonderful, and then you could place them in your cozy corner. When children go to the cozy corner to calm down, they would know how to use these mirrors as a strategy. We must differentiate for each student in our group. Kara's Kit is a wonderful resource that looks at common activities in early childhood and makes suggestions on ways to support children who are having difficulties. The book makes suggestions for adaptation types by looking at how could we change the environment? How could we change or adapt the activity? How could we change or adapt the routine? Are there different materials we could supply? Could we change the requirements? Could we change the instruction? What type of assistance could we offer? Again, you have to take the time to plan for these adaptations. You have to be ready to offer choices and to provide a variety of learning materials for all children. Again, we're not just playing a game. We're doing a small group in order to collect assessment data and to see how our children are doing. We touched on this a bit earlier, but you want to walk away from a small group with some good data on how each child did. If you use goal assessment, you might be doing an assessment opportunity card during small group. You could make a copy of the objective that you're focusing on, and when a child takes their turn, use a little Post-it note and write their name on that Post-it tab and place it at the color band that they're at. You also could make a chart with all the children's names and write documentation underneath that objective that you are focusing on in your game. You may want to take a short video and write up documentation later. Setting up small group opportunities in your preschool classroom allows you to watch children more closely and observe their behavior when working with a team. Small group and your schedules. Small groups are most effective when you have them daily in your schedule. Find a place for it and stick with it. You don't have to meet with every group every single day. You just have to have a designated time that you're going to meet with one or two groups. It really is best if small group is not during centers because the focus of centers is truly to play, and in small groups you're presenting a skill or a concept. How do you organize your small groups? In the paper I referenced before, When Few is More, Small Groups in Early Childhood, the author shares that small groups should be intentionally organized, meaning that each child is deliberately chosen for a particular group or activity. For example, a few children who are having trouble with a specific letter might be put into a group together so that they have the opportunity to practice their skills together. Or two children who do not typically get along well might be placed in a group together to read books about friendship building, empathy, or conflict resolution. Here are 4 factors you can consider when forming your groups. Your groups can have similar abilities, mixed abilities, so they can use peer models, similar interest, or let kids pick which group they want to join in once in a while. How can you really run small groups if you have a classroom filled with 20 kids? Here are a few ways you can run 3 groups at the same time. If you have more than 5 children in a group, especially with 3, 4s, and 5s, it's truly hard to individualize your instruction. It's really important that the independent group work be engaging so the children can work independently. So, if you have 3 groups, one group can work with the teacher, one group can work with the assistant, and then the third group is doing an engaging independent activity. You could have an optional small group during centers. You could have a required small group during center. You could train a parent volunteers to come in and lead a group. But again, children can work independently, but that independent activity has to be engaging, and the children need to know the expectations. Here are some few ideas of what independent activities could be. You could have children do some journal writing with a prompt. You could have the children work on a group activity. You could have children do a 3D art project. You could take some fine motor activities and give the children choices. They also could work on a small group activity that maybe previously you played together. There are many other independent activities that children can be doing. It's just critical that they know what the expectations are and they know how to use the materials. So in summary, to do small groups, you must be prepared, you have to keep your eye on the rest of the class, and you have to have open co-teaching communication. Your assistant or your parent volunteers or even any specialists that might come into your classroom need to know what the expectations are for that group. So before we end this webinar, stop and think. How will you change your small groups starting tomorrow? What did you learn today? Go back to that successful small group activity you thought of at the beginning of the webinar. What would you change? What were you doing right during that activity? How could you support your students a little bit more? How could you gather assessment in a different way? Think about what you learned, and I'm sure your small groups will be successful. Thank you for joining me today for this webinar.